She's been standing in that field for over 5,000 years. No name on her, no explanation nearby, no record of who placed her there or why. And she's one of the smallest structures in this video. Britain likes to think of itself as a place with deep history. Roman roads, Norman castles, medieval cathedrals. But all of it, is recent. Embarrassingly recent, actually, when you consider what lies beneath. Buried under fields, submerged in peat bogs, half swallowed by chalk hillsides. There are structures in this country that predate every nation, every language, every written word on earth. Structures built by people whose names we will never know, whose beliefs we cannot read, whose intentions remain, after decades of archaeology, genuinely, profoundly unclear. This is not a list of old things. This is something closer to an excavation. 14 structures, 14 moments where the ground opens and you realize that the history of Britain doesn't begin where anyone told you it did. It goes much, much further down. Number 14, the Tretheavy Quoit, Cornwall. There's a moment driving through East Cornwall where the hedgerows open and you see it. 5 upright stones, massive, rough, holding aloft a capstone so large it seems physically wrong, like something tipped off a cliff and caught mid-fall. The Tretheavy Quoit, around 5,500 years old. It's a portal dolmen. That's the technical term. A chamber tomb. Or at least that's what we think it is. Human remains have been found near structures like this. But here's what nobody quite explains. The engineering required to lift that capstone, which weighs somewhere in the region of 20 tons, would have challenged a modern construction crew. These were Neolithic people. No iron, no wheels, no pulleys of any recognized form. And yet, there it is. What's strange about Tretheavy specifically is how intact it feels. Most megalithic structures in Britain are ruins, fallen stones, collapsed chambers, centuries of weather and human interference. This one still stands almost as it was built. You can walk into it. You can stand inside it. And when you do, there's this odd quality to the light. The capstone has a small hole near one end, and depending on the time of year, a shaft of light cuts through at a very specific angle. Deliberate? Perhaps astronomical? Possibly. Or maybe it's coincidence and we're pattern matching onto stone. That uncertainty, that's where this video lives. Not in answers, in the space just before them. Number 13, the Merry Maidens, Cornwall. Perfect. That's the first word most people use. The Merry Maidens stone circle is almost perfectly circular. 19 granite stones, evenly spaced, sitting in a field near St. Barian, as if someone set them down with a measuring tape last Tuesday. They didn't. They've been there for roughly 4,000 years. The name comes from a Christian legend. 19 girls turned to stone for dancing on the Sabbath. It's the kind of story that gets placed over things people don't understand. A way of making the inexplicable feel contained. Safe. Ours. But strip the legend away and what you have is something harder to process. This circle was laid out with a geometric precision that implies mathematical knowledge. Not complex mathematics by modern standards, but organized spatial reasoning, consistent measurement, intentional planning. From a society that left no written record of any of it. There are 2 standing stones in the field adjacent to the circle. Taller than the others, set apart. They're called the Pipers, supposedly the musicians who were also petrified. In reality, their relationship to the circle is unknown. Whether they predate it, postdate it, or were always meant as a pair with it, nobody knows. What stays with you at the Merry Maidens isn't the mystery exactly. It's the tidiness, the care. Someone spent enormous effort making this precise. That implies purpose. But the purpose is gone, and the precision remains, and somehow that combination is quietly unsettling. Number 12. Arbor Low, Derbyshire, You have to work for Arbor Low. It sits on a high limestone plateau in the Peak District, reached by a farm track, surrounded by wind that doesn't stop. When you arrive, you're looking at what appears to be a collapsed stone circle. About 50 large limestone slabs lying flat on the ground, arranged in an oval, surrounded by a substantial bank and ditch. Almost every stone is horizontal, fallen presumably over the millennia. Except, nobody's entirely certain they were ever standing. That's a strange thought, isn't it? We assume stone circles had upright stones because the ones we know best, Stonehenge, Avebury, still have some standing. But Arbor Low may always have been a recumbent monument. The stones laid flat, intentionally, from the very beginning. If so, what does that mean? Why build something you have to look down into rather than up at? What does a monument mean when it lies on the earth rather than rising from it? There's a Bronze Age burial mound built directly into the bank, placed there, deliberately, long after the main structure was created. Someone, centuries later, chose to be buried at this specific place. That's a kind of continuity that doesn't need language to communicate. This site held meaning across generations we can't count, for reasons we can't access. Standing there in the Derbyshire wind, it feels less like a ruin and more like something still listening. Number 11. Castlerigg Stone Circle, Cumbria. The setting alone would make it significant. Castlerigg sits in a natural amphitheatre of mountains in the Lake District. Helvellyn to the east, Blencathra to the north. The Cumbrian fells in every direction. 38 stones, the tallest over 2 meters, arranged in a slightly flattened circle about 30 meters across. Around 5,000 years old, which places it among the earliest stone circles in Britain. What separates Castlerigg from most is the internal rectangle. 10 stones arranged inside the main circle, forming what appears to be a smaller enclosure. No other British stone circle has quite this feature. Nobody knows what it was for. Storage, ritual, a specific space for specific people. The archaeology gives us the structure but not the function. What researchers have confirmed is astronomical alignment. At the autumn equinox, the sun rises directly over a distinctive peak to the east, and its light falls at a precise angle through the circle. This wasn't accident. Someone understood the calendar. Someone tracked the sun across years, decades, long enough to identify the pattern and decide it was worth encoding in stone. You think about the kind of attention that requires. Generations of people watching the same horizon, noting the same morning, passing the knowledge forward. A tradition of observation that eventually became architecture. That level of cultural continuity, sustained, purposeful, permanent, is what separates Castlerigg from a curiosity. This was knowledge, preserved in the only medium they had that would last. Number 10. The Rollright Stones, Oxfordshire. The Rollright Stones sit right on the boundary between Oxfordshire and Warwickshire, on a ridgeline that feels oddly exposed, like you've climbed higher than the surrounding land quite accounts for. There are 3 distinct monuments here, built across different periods, which is unusual. A stone circle, a single tall standing stone, and a collapsed chamber tomb. 3 separate constructions, spanning possibly 2,000 years, all concentrated in the same small area. The circle is called the King's Men. 77 stones, many of them heavily weathered and encrusted with lichen, arranged in a ring that wasn't quite circular to begin with. The standing stone, the King's Stone, sits slightly apart across the road and appears to be later than the circle. The chamber tomb, the Whispering Knights, is older than both. What's compelling about Rollright is this layering. Different people across vast stretches of time kept returning to this place and adding to it. Each group apparently felt the need to leave something here. That sense of a location holding accumulated significance, not just built once and abandoned but returned to, again and again, is deeply human and completely opaque. We know they kept coming back. We don't know why this particular ridge, what they found here, what they believed they were maintaining. The Whispering Knights is the most atmospheric of the three, 4 upright stones leaning inward, supporting what remains of a capstone, clustered together in a way that does genuinely look like figures in quiet conversation, named by people who felt something there and reached for the nearest image. Sometimes the names people give to things tell you more about the effect than any archaeology can. Number 9. Callanish, Isle of Lewis. This is where the scale begins to shift. Callanish stands on a peninsula on the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides, facing a sea loch in one direction and a ridge of hills called the Sleeping Beauty in the other. 13 tall stones arranged in a circle, with a monolith at the center that stands nearly 5 meters high, and then 4 avenues of stones radiating outward like arms, the longest running north to south for nearly 90 meters. The whole complex covers an enormous area, and it was built, in its earliest phases, around 5,000 years ago. Possibly earlier. The astronomical alignments at Callanish are not subtle. Every 18.6 years, the full cycle of the moon's movement. There's a night when the moon rises low over the Sleeping Beauty hills and tracks along the stone avenue before setting in the center of the circle. The Hebridean Celts, who arrived here thousands of years after Callanish was built, called this night the Shining One Walks. They were describing something they could see but couldn't explain, a phenomenon engineered by people who had lived here long before them. Think about that. A civilization builds a precision astronomical instrument. That civilization disappears. Another people arrive, centuries later, see the instrument functioning and give it a new name, understanding it as supernatural rather than mathematical. The knowledge of what it was, the technical knowledge, is completely lost. Only the effect remains. Under the central stone, archaeologists found a small passage grave, a burial chamber inserted into the circle much later. Here, as at Rollright, someone decided they wanted to be in this place permanently. Whatever the site meant to them, they didn't want to leave it. Callanish is often compared to Stonehenge. The comparison is reasonable in terms of ambition, but Callanish feels more solitary, more exposed to weather, more raw. Stonehenge has become a monument to itself. Callanish still feels like it belongs to the wind. Number 8. The Long Meg and her daughters, Cumbria, 69 stones. Some sources say more. The exact count varies depending on how you define what's still standing, what's fallen, what's been dragged away over centuries. The Long Meg and her daughters circle near Penrith is one of the largest stone circles in England, around 100 meters across, and it has attracted almost no mainstream attention compared to its actual scale. Long Meg herself stands outside the circle, a tall red sandstone pillar, 4 meters high, covered on 2 sides with spiral carvings. The daughters are limestone. Different material, same site. The contrast is deliberate, or at least it seems deliberate. Nobody has been able to confirm why 2 entirely different stones were used. The carvings on Long Meg are the most significant detail. Spirals, rings, cup marks. These same symbols appear at Newgrange in Ireland, at Gavrinis in Brittany, at sites across the Neolithic Atlantic world. A visual language consistent across thousands of miles and possibly thousands of years, shared by communities that may never have physically met. Whether it represents cosmology, territory, ritual instruction, or something else entirely, the scholarship remains genuinely divided. At the winter solstice, the sun sets directly over Long Meg, as seen from the center of the circle. Again, this is precise. Again, this required sustained observation and careful placement. What bothers me, if bothers is the right word, is how much of this landscape we've simply driven past, built over, farmed around, without registering what it actually is. Long Meg has stood in a working field for millennia. Farmers have plowed around her. Generations have walked past this 4-meter sentinel and thought, well, there she is again. Number 7. Wayland's Smithy, Oxfordshire. The name comes from Anglo-Saxon legend. Wayland, a Norse smith god, supposedly inhabits the tomb and will reshoe your horse overnight if you leave it tethered here with a coin. The Saxons who told that story had no idea who built this place or when. They found an ancient stone chamber in a grove of trees on a chalk ridgeway, felt its age and strangeness, and filled the silence with a god. Wayland's Smithy is a Neolithic long barrow, a burial mound, built in 2 phases. The first, around 3590 BCE, was a simple wooden mortuary structure containing the remains of at least 14 people. Then, roughly a century later, a second monument was built directly over the first. A massive stone-chambered long barrow, enclosed by a facade of tall standing stones and covered by a chalk mound that originally stretched for over 50 meters. The rebuilding is what's extraordinary. A community, possibly the descendants of those who built the first monument, decided the existing structure wasn't enough. They didn't just add to it. They encased it. They buried their first building inside their second, preserving something beneath something else, as if the original was still important even after being superseded. That's not purely functional behavior. That's something closer to reverence, a respect for what came before even in the act of replacing it. The chamber today is accessible. You can walk in, crouch inside, feel the weight of the capstone above you. It's dark in there even in summer. The light changes quality. You become very aware of the stone. What happens to the body and the mind when you're inside a structure that old, in a space that was specifically designed to be a threshold between the living and the dead? I'm not sure archaeology has a vocabulary for that. Number 6. Maeshowe, Orkney. Orkney changes the conversation. Everything on the Scottish mainland, everything in England and Wales. It's all extraordinary. But Orkney is a different order of problem. Maeshowe is a chambered cairn on mainland Orkney, built around 2800 BCE. From outside, it looks like a large grass mound. Unremarkable, almost domestic. You enter through a low stone passageway, crawling or crouching for about 14 meters. Then the passage opens into a chamber, roughly 4.5 meters square, with corbelled walls rising to a height of almost 4 meters. 3 side cells branch off the main chamber. The construction is precise, large flat sandstone slabs fitted together with a tightness that required no mortar, and has survived 5,000 years of Orkney weather. On the winter solstice, the setting sun aligns perfectly with the entrance passage and floods the rear wall of the chamber with light. For a few days around the 21st of December, the deepest, darkest chamber in this ancient mound is illuminated from the outside world. Then the light retreats and the chamber goes dark again for another year. This was engineered, not approximated. Engineered. The entrance passage is oriented to within a fraction of a degree of the solstice sunset. Whoever built this understood the solar year with extraordinary precision and decided that this moment, the shortest day, the return of the light, was worth commemorating in stone that would outlast them by millennia. Then, in the 12th century CE, nearly 4,000 years after the tomb was built, Norse crusaders sheltering here carved runic inscriptions on the walls. Some are functional, some are surprisingly human. Thorny bedded, Helgi says so. Ingegerth is the most beautiful of all women. They were leaving their mark, as people do, without knowing whose mark they were standing inside. Maeshowe holds 5,000 years of human desire to say, I was here, I existed. Something about this place mattered. Number 5. The Stones of Stonehenge, Orkney. Half a mile from Maeshowe, across a narrow isthmus between 2 lochs, stand 4 tall stones, all that remain of what was originally a circle of 12. The Stones of Stonehenge, possibly the oldest standing stone circle in Britain. Dated to around 3100 BCE, which places them even earlier than Stonehenge. The surviving stones are extraordinary individually. The tallest is nearly 6 meters high, slender, sharp-edged, the same pale Orkney sandstone as Maeshowe, quarried from the same bedrock. They don't look weathered. They look placed, almost recently, with intention that hasn't aged. The site was surrounded by a wide ditch and a bank, making it an enclosed ritual space. Inside the circle, archaeologists found evidence of fires, animal bones, and human remains, fragments of skull and limbs, carefully arranged, not simply buried. Whatever was happening here involved fire, animals, and the dead. The specifics are gone. What remains is the geometry and the residue. Stennis sits within what archaeologists have called the heart of Neolithic Orkney, a dense cluster of monuments, all within a few kilometers of each other. Maeshowe, Stennis, the Ring of Brodgar, the Ness of Brodgar. These aren't isolated constructions. They're a network, a landscape shaped, deliberately and at enormous effort, into a ceremonial geography. Someone designed that landscape. Over generations, possibly centuries, a community poured its energy into transforming this particular corner of a windswept island into a place that meant something. The scale of that collective intention is difficult to hold in your head. And then, at some point, they stopped. The building ceased. The rituals presumably faded. The people moved, changed, disappeared, and the stones remained in the same formation, carrying the shape of a belief that no longer has a name. Number 4, the Ness of Brodgar, Orkney. This one is different from everything else on this list because it's still being excavated. The Ness of Brodgar sits between Stennis and the Ring of Brodgar, on a narrow strip of land between two lochs. Archaeologists have known something was buried here for a while. But it wasn't until 2003 that excavations began to reveal the true scale of what's underneath. What they found, and the site is less than 30% excavated, so this isn't the full picture, is a complex of large, sophisticated stone buildings. Not simple shelters, structures with thick walls, paved floors, decorated interiors. The largest, called Structure 10, has walls over 4 meters thick and enclosed an interior space comparable to a cathedral nave. It was decorated with painted geometric designs, red, orange, yellow, the oldest painted architecture in Northern Europe. This was a place where large numbers of people came together, not to live permanently, but to gather. Evidence suggests feasting on a massive scale. Cattle bones by the thousand, deposited deliberately at the end of what seemed to be significant events. At some point, the entire complex was sealed, the buildings deliberately buried, their interiors filled in what appears to have been a planned ceremonial abandonment. Someone chose to end this place, not through decay or disaster, but through intention. They closed it down. Why? What ended? What changed? The archaeology can tell us the sequence of actions, but not the reason behind them. The decision to seal a major ceremonial complex is not a small thing. It implies that something, a belief, a tradition, an authority, had run its course. The Ness of Brodgar keeps getting more complex the more they dig. Every season reveals something that reframes what they thought they knew. The full picture may take another generation to emerge, which means we're in the middle of a discovery, not the end of one. That's an unusual position to occupy, knowing that the answer is in the ground and that we haven't reached it yet. Number 3, Silbury Hill, Wiltshire. Silbury Hill is the largest man-made mound in prehistoric Europe. That sentence sounds dry. The reality isn't. It stands 40 meters high. Its base covers over 2 hectares. It contains an estimated 340,000 cubic meters of chalk, clay, and gravel, material excavated by hand, basket by basket, and placed with extraordinary precision to create a perfectly engineered artificial hill. It was built in phases, beginning around 2400 BCE, with each successive phase encasing the previous one, a technique similar to what we see at Wayland's smithy, though on a vastly different scale. The engineering alone is staggering. Silbury Hill has survived 5,000 years of English weather, including several major floods, without significant structural failure. Modern engineers have studied it and acknowledge that the construction techniques used were not primitive. They were sophisticated, deliberate, and effective. And nobody knows why it was built. Seriously. No burial has been found inside. No obvious astronomical alignment has been confirmed. There's no agreed-upon ritual function. Silbury Hill sits there, enormous, precise, 5,000 years old. And all the archaeology can say with confidence is, this took generations to build. It was clearly important and we don't know what it was for. It sits in the wider Avebury landscape, near the stone circle, near the West Kennet Long Barrow, part of a ritual geography that covers kilometers. So it wasn't isolated. It meant something in relation to the other monuments. But what that relationship was, what Silbury represented within the system, remains opaque. There's something particularly strange about a monument this large having no explanation. Smaller, simpler structures, at least we can speculate. But Silbury required centuries of communal labor. The decision to build it must have been immense. The motivation must have been powerful. And it left no trace that we can read. Number 2. Avebury, Wiltshire. Most people know Stonehenge. Fewer fully reckon with Avebury, and that's a genuine oversight in how we understand British prehistory. The Avebury Henge is the largest stone circle in the world. Not the most famous, the largest. The outer circle originally contained about 98 standing stones, some of them weighing over 40 tons, arranged in a ring over a kilometer in circumference. The henge ditch that surrounds it was cut to a depth of 9 meters through solid chalk, without metal tools, and is over 20 meters wide. The material from the ditch was piled into the outer bank, which still stands up to 6 meters high. Inside the outer circle, there were 2 separate inner circles, each large enough to contain Stonehenge within them. A village has grown up inside the monument. People have lived here, built houses here, for centuries, without ever fully registering that they're inside the largest ritual enclosure in prehistoric Europe. The Avebury complex extends far beyond the henge itself. 2 great stone avenues once ran from the circle, the West Kennet Avenue, of which many stones survive, leading towards a smaller ritual site called the sanctuary. The scale of the designed landscape is almost incomprehensible. This wasn't a monument. This was a capital. Something happened here that was important enough to justify an effort that makes even Stonehenge look manageable by comparison. The question isn't just what ritual happened within it. It's what kind of society can sustain the collective will to build across generations, add to, maintain, and extend a project this large over centuries. And then, again, it ended. People stopped adding stones. The ceremonies, whatever they were, ceased. In the medieval period, local Christians began toppling and burying the stones, trying to erase what they apparently feared or didn't understand. Some of those buried stones were found in the 20th century with human skeletons beneath them. People who were helping to topple stones and got crushed in the process, interred where they fell. History folded over. History folded over history. All of it inside a monument so large that people have been living inside it for 1,000 years without quite understanding where they are. Number 1. Stonehenge, Wiltshire. After everything else on this list, Stonehenge might seem like the obvious choice. Too familiar, too visited, too iconic to carry real mystery anymore. But that familiarity is deceptive. And when you set aside everything you think you know, what remains is a problem that archaeology has been circling for 2 centuries without resolution. Stonehenge in its final form, the monument we recognize, was built around 2500 BCE. but the site is far older. The first evidence of construction dates to around 3000 BCE, when a large circular ditch and bank were dug, and a ring of pits was created. The blue stones, the smaller inner stones, weighing up to 4 tons each, were brought here from the Silbury Hills in southwest Wales. 240 miles by sea and land without wheeled transport. 50 to 80 stones. The sarcens, the massive trilithons, the lintel stones, the uprights that define the monument's silhouette, came from Marlborough Downs, 25 miles north. Some weigh 25 tons. They were shaped. The uprights were carved with a slight convex curve, a technique called entasis, which corrects for an optical illusion and makes the stones appear straight. This is the same technique used in classical Greek architecture, thousands of years later. Stonehenge was not built quickly. The site evolved over at least 1,500 years, with different groups making different changes. The blue stones were rearranged multiple times. Some stones were removed and reused. The monument as it stands is a palimpsest, a document written and rewritten by different hands across a span of time longer than the entire Christian era. The midwinter sunset and midsummer sunrise align precisely through the monument's axis. This is documented and confirmed. But whether Stonehenge was primarily an astronomical instrument, a burial ground, a healing sanctuary, a place of ancestor veneration, or something that doesn't map onto any of those categories, the debate remains live. What we know for certain: enormous numbers of people were buried near Stonehenge over a very long period. People came from far away. Isotope analysis of skeletal remains shows individuals who grew up in the Alps, in the Mediterranean, in Scandinavia. Stonehenge was not a local monument. It was, in some sense, a destination. That's what makes it irreducibly strange. Not just the engineering, the intention. This was a place that people chose, that people traveled towards, for reasons that mattered enough to cross a continent for. And whatever those reasons were, they stopped mattering. The pilgrimages ended. The ceremonies faded. The culture that made Stonehenge meaningful was replaced by cultures that couldn't read it. By the time the Romans arrived, the monument was already old beyond memory. Closing. The island that forgot who it was. Walk through Britain, and you walk through layers of forgetting. Roman roads run over older trackways. Medieval churches sit on Saxon foundations, on Roman sites, on Iron Age hill forts, on Neolithic monuments. Each layer knowing something of the one above it, and almost nothing of what lies below. The 14 structures in this video were all built by people who have no name in any record. No text preserves what they believed. No lineage connects them to a living culture. They built in stone because stone lasts. And yet even stone can't carry meaning forward without people to read it. What these monuments tell us, if they tell us anything, is that the threshold of what we call civilization is much further back than we usually place it. Long before writing, long before metal, long before anything we associate with organized society, people were coordinating across landscapes, sustaining traditions across generations, encoding knowledge in monumental form, doing things that required communication, memory, planning, mathematics, and something harder to name, a shared sense of what mattered and why. That civilization had no text. It had stone, and the stone is still here, still standing in fields, still catching the solstice light, still drawing people who feel something standing next to something that old, without being entirely sure what they're feeling. The history of Britain doesn't start with the Romans. It doesn't start with the Celts. It starts in silence 5,000 years ago, on a chalk hill in Wiltshire, where someone placed a stone and stepped back and looked at it. We're still looking,